Lucas's voice just fell silent. It felt as if he sensed something. He turned to look into the ward. Immediately after, our gazes collided. Ethan felt that my hand was very cold. He lifted his eyes, tightly wrapped in bandages. A worried expression appeared on his youthful face. "Mom, are you okay?" Seeing Ethan's face, Lucas looked a bit surprised. His expression was also somewhat unnatural. I lowered the hand that was covering Ethan's ears. I said weakly, "I'm fine," after my son was injured. I immediately called Lucas, but he said he couldn't come because of an urgent matter at the company. Not long after, he publicly announced that the child Sophia is carrying is his only heir. It's really a bit ironic. Sophia looked like she had run into an old friend she hadn't seen in a long time. She blinked her curled eyelashes. Her face was filled with concern. "Sister, you're here too. Is there something wrong with Ethan's eyes? Can he not see?" Ethan's complexion suddenly turned pale. I had a stern expression. I said to Sophia, "Ethan's eyes are fine. He just got a little hurt. He'll recover after some rest." Sophia seemed startled by me. She turned around and rushed into Lucas's arms. Her eyes were red. She gently nudged Lucas's abdomen with her slightly protruding belly. She whispered, "Lucas, I didn't mean it like that." Lucas frowned tightly. His expression was as cold as ice. He was about to say something, but was tugged at the corner of his clothes by a small hand. "Dad, is that you? Did you come to see me?" Ethan's face was full of anticipation. Even though he can't see, he is sure this person is Dad. Lucas's gaze softened a bit. He wanted to reach out and touch Ethan's head. Sophia took a deep breath. She said softly, "Just a moment. My stomach feels a bit uncomfortable." At that moment, the child in front of her was suddenly pushed to the ground. Then came a man's anxious shout. "Are you okay? Where is the doctor?" I held the silent Ethan tightly. Teardrops flowed uncontrollably. 4 years ago, Lucas faced a financial crisis. He was on the brink of bankruptcy. To help him attract investment, I spent a whole night with his competitor. Lucas usually never drank, but after hearing the news that day, he drank all night long, so drunk that he lost consciousness. Later, his career flourished. To thank me, he disregarded the gossip from the outside world and insisted on marrying me, who was already pregnant. He once sincerely said, "No matter whose child it is, I will treat him as my own." But ever since the child was born, Lucas has started making excuses not to come home. He openly takes Sophia to various social events. When drunk, he becomes violent. He vents his emotions on me. He even says hurtful things. He is indifferent to Ethan, as if treating him like a stranger fostered in the house. He only provides the basic necessities of life. But he doesn't know. Ethan is actually his biological son. When he faced financial problems, I knelt in the pouring rain at his competitor's door for a whole night. When I got back home, drunk, he pulled me into the room. We struggled the whole night. After that, I had a high fever and went to the hospital covered in bruises. The next day, Lucas came to the hospital with Sophia. Sophia said that Lucas accidentally hurt her when he was drunk last night. We ran into each other in the ward, but he had no memory of what happened the previous night. When he saw the hickey on my neck, his eyes, once filled with tenderness, suddenly turned cold. He stood there in silence for a long time. Then he suddenly hugged me. He said he wanted to marry me. The past pain was still vividly clear. The classmates were right. My dad doesn't like me. Even if you say, Mom, that he is my biological father, but the classmates still don't believe it. Ethan suddenly said this while in my arms. I looked down at his pale little face. A sharp pain pierced my heart. I asked softly. My voice was a bit hoarse. Mom will find you a dad who truly loves you. What do you think? Ethan nodded vigorously. I started to handle the paternity test between Lucas and Ethan. Since I planned to take Ethan away, I had to let Lucas know the truth. Due to the incident with his injured eye, I specifically took Ethan to kindergarten for a visit. The teacher only let that student apologize to Ethan. "Hello, I'm sorry. I was so angry that I wanted to teach that arrogant little fatty a lesson." The teacher stopped me. She gave me a disdainful look. "Ma'am, it's better not to dwell on this matter. Tom's dad is the president of Smith Group, and what he just said makes sense." "Right," the teacher muttered under her breath. "He doesn't understand shame, and still doesn't want anyone to say anything." I looked at the teacher in disbelief. I was shaking with anger. Who said my son is a bastard? Today, I don't care who his dad is. I won't let him go. After saying that, I grabbed that little fatty and slapped him hard a few times. "Mom, stop it. Dad will be upset." Ethan reached out and pulled me back. He already knew. Dad never stands by his side. I said to my son with a serious expression. Don't worry, the Smith group is not as powerful as Lucas. At that time, I was still full of confidence, even if Lucas has no feelings for Ethan. After all, they have been father and son for so many years. He can't be completely indifferent. The situation escalated. Lucas hurried over when he found out. He took us, mother and son, with him. Without saying a word, he drove us to the entrance of the Smith group. I looked pale. I asked, Lucas, what do you mean by that? With your abilities, are you still afraid of the Smith group? He stared into my eyes. The corners of his mouth slightly lifted. He said, the company has recently collaborated with Smith. We need to be careful not to strain the relationship too much. You hit Michael's son. Just go apologize to him in person. Ethan kept hitting Lucas's leg. It was Tom who hurt me first. Why should Mom apologize? You are wrong to do this. You don't deserve to be my dad. Lucas frowned. A hand grabbed Ethan's collar. He said coldly, you're not my biological father. I'm not obligated to help you solve these problems. Do you understand? My eyes are red. He shouted loudly. Lucas, you act like a father. Lucas sneered. If you have the ability, go find his biological father. Ethan stopped struggling. Blood-red tears flowed from the bandaged eyes. Seeing that blood-red color, Lucas was stunned. He put down the figurine in his hand. He said in a softer tone, as long as you behave and listen. No more causing trouble. I will buy you the new mountain bike model. For this model, Ethan bothered him for a whole month. Every day at work, he brought him a bag. After work, he changed his shoes. The little guy's attempts to please are quite adorable, but he has been wearing a stern face the whole time. He completely ignored me. Lucas probably wanted to see Ethan shout in excitement, but instead, he only received indifference and resentment. I wore a slight smirk on my face. I said to Lucas, you can leave now. Lucas's expression darkened. He turned around and left. I was slapped over 100 times by Tom's mother at the Smith group entrance. Sophia kept advising me, Emily, stop hitting Isabella. What if Lucas gets angry if he finds out? Tom's mother did not stop. She looked at me as if I were a dirty rag. How could Lucas possibly be angry? He should actually feel happy. Isabella betrayed Lucas first, and shamelessly had another man's child. Now Lucas likes you. You and the child in your belly are the true heirs of the Smith family. I tightly held Ethan, who was trembling in my arms. The split corners of his mouth shouted loudly. Don't listen to those words. Ethan, you're not what they say you are. You're not. A burst of laughter came from the crowd. Can't you say a few words? Mind your own business. I smiled as I took Ethan to the hospital, rebandaged the gauze on his face. The nurse looked at my badly swollen face. Her eyes revealed a look of sympathy. She gently asked me, do you need some medicine as well? The older nurse quickly pulled her aside. She whispered, don't pity her. That frivolous woman isn't worth sympathy. I held Ethan's hand, stood up straight, and walked straight out of the hospital. Before leaving, I also specifically took that paternity test report with a 99% accuracy. It felt like heaven was responding to my mood. Suddenly, it started pouring rain. I took out my nearly dead phone at the hospital entrance. I called the driver Jack. Jack lazily replied, sorry, ma'am. Lucas asked me to pick up Miss Sophia for dinner. You should just take a taxi back yourself. My phone also completely ran out of battery at that moment. Ethan kept his head down. His mood was a bit low. He quietly asked, Mom, are we not going back? I feel a bit sleepy. I told him to wait for me in the hospital lobby. Then I went out by myself. Half an hour later, I hailed a taxi in the rain. I carried Ethan into the car. He asked me, Mom, why are you all wet? Ethan touched my wet clothes. He couldn't see, but he was eager to know what happened. I said, I waited for half an hour for a taxi in the rain. How could my clothes not get wet? The driver muttered softly. Then he continued, didn't they say that everyone living in Pinewood Hills is wealthy? Why not get a driver? In this heavy rain, it's impossible to get a cab. Fortunately, you ran into me. I really couldn't just stand by. I'll give you a ride since I'm heading that way. Ethan's body suddenly went stiff. Teardrops fell down again. I quickly reached out to wipe his tears away. Stop crying. We arrived at the entrance of the villa. The rain gradually stopped. I asked the driver to wait for me. I'm going to get some money. Just as I carried the sleeping Ethan off the car, I heard Sophia say with a sarcastic tone, Why did you arrive so late, sister? She said apologetically. I'm really sorry. Jack insisted on picking me up. I guess you'll have to take a cab. I ignored her. I continued walking forward, and then she tripped me. I instinctively protected Ethan on my back. The back of my hand got scraped. I shouted, "What are you doing?" She covered her mouth. She said in surprise, "I'm sorry, big sister. I didn't mean to in the end. It was the driver who couldn't stand it. He helped me up. He said to Sophia, 'How could you do this? She's even carrying a child.'" Sophia was halfway through her sentence, suddenly stopped. Her eyes turned red all at once. She asked, "What happened?" Lucas's voice came from behind. I felt a spark in my eyes. I was just about to speak, but Sophia spoke first. She pursed her lips. 2 tears were hanging on her face. Big sister just called and asked Jack to pick her up. Later I heard that I was also in the car. So she angrily said she would come back herself. I originally intended to pick her up out of goodwill, but she and the driver said I was an unwelcome third party. She even said I was shameless. Lucas's expression became even worse. He stared at my swollen cheek for a while. His face showed obvious surprise and a hint of pain. Sophia continued to touch her belly and speak. My sister also said, "Ethan is the only bloodline of the Smith family, and what's in my belly is something unwanted." Lucas's pain vanished in an instant. Anger ignited in his eyes. His face was filled with gloom. Just as Lucas was about to get angry, the driver suddenly stepped forward and said, "Don't believe her. What she said is not true." Then the driver explained the whole situation. Lucas looked at Sophia. His gaze was profound. "Is what he said true? Did you really push Isabella?" I smiled sarcastically. The bloodstains on the ground said it all. But Lucas turned a blind eye. Sophia pouted. She said with a face full of grievance, "It was my sister and that driver who pushed me. They wanted me to have an abortion. Fortunately, I dodged quickly, so I wasn't pushed over. My sister's attempt to harm me failed. Instead, she fell down herself." Lucas's expression immediately turned cold. I hurried to explain, "You misunderstood. What Sophia said isn't true." Lucas didn't listen to my explanation. He grabbed my arm. His tone was icy as he warned me, "If you lay a hand on Sophia again next time, I won't let you off." After he finished speaking, he glanced at Ethan on my back. His eyes carried a warning. I trembled violently. It felt like my soul had left my body. The 2 of them helped each other leave. The driver was astonished by the scene. He stared in shock. Then he sighed sympathetically. He said, "Forget it. I won't even charge you for the fare. To marry someone like that, that's really enough." I groggily carried Ethan through the front door. On the table was the chicken soup left over from Sophia. There were also various delicious dishes I had never seen before. A balloon imported from Australia, fish maw from the Atlantic, and snow swallow from South Africa. Each dish was particularly exquisite. Some dishes I had never seen before. I suddenly thought of when I was pregnant before. Lucas used to bring me fast food takeout every day. When I was about to give birth, the doctor said I was severely malnourished. I might not have the strength to give birth. That's when Lucas had good intentions. He gave me a ginseng that someone had sent him. The nanny, Aunt Mary, glanced at me. She said in a flat tone, "Madam is back. Haven't you eaten yet?" Today, Lucas specially prepared a lot of supplements for Miss Sophia. Miss Sophia can't eat all of it by herself. "Why don't you come and eat?" I looked at the leftover dishes on the table. "I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable," I said coldly. "No need." He responded dismissively. "What are you pretending for?" Aunt Mary complained in a low voice. "It seems my sister is somewhat dissatisfied with me." On the stairs, Sophia leaned against Lucas's chest. Her eyes were filled with obvious provocation. Lucas's gaze was icy. "What right does she have to be unhappy with you? I haven't even said anything bad about her." I brushed past them with Ethan in my arms. Right now, I'm only concerned about sleeping Ethan. I completely ignored what Lucas and Sophia were saying. I placed Ethan on the bed. I touched his forehead. That's when I realized he was burning up. "Ethan, don't make Mommy worry." I shook his small body. My heart was filled with immense fear. Ethan's cheeks were flushed. His little hands were flailing in the air. Finally, they fell weakly to the side. He said softly, "Mom, I'm so scared. It's too dark. I can't see anything." He mumbled in a daze, "It's so hot." I hurriedly helped him take off his coat. I wiped his body with a towel. I searched through the medicine cabinet at home, but I couldn't find any fever reducer. There's no other way. I had to knock on Lucas's door. The knocking became more urgent. Sophia opened the door. She was casually dressed. I couldn't care about anything else. I shouted directly inside, "Lucas, our son has a fever. We need to get to the hospital quickly. Can you take us, please?" The man finally walked up to me and said, he looked down at me from above, like a lofty deity. "Why?" Sophia looked up and touched her belly. "Sister, You got it wrong. Ethan is not Lucas's son. This one in my belly is. I suddenly remembered something. I quickly pulled out that crumpled piece of paper from my pocket. My voice trembled a bit but was very firm. Ethan is Lucas's child. This is the paternity test report. Ethan is indeed Lucas's biological son. Lucas was taken aback. His gaze lingered on that crumpled piece of paper. Lucas hadn't had a chance to speak yet. Sophia couldn't help but laugh out loud. She looked at the other person and asked, "Sister, why did you bring out a diagnosis that is completely illegible? Do you really think this unclear paper can prove that Ethan is Lucas's child? You're so naive." I was stunned. I unconsciously looked at the paper in my hand. The originally clear writing had become blurred by the heavy rain. This is no longer recognizable as a paternity test report. It's clearly just a piece of scrap paper. Lucas appeared very stern. There was a hint of anger in his voice. He said, "Isabella, have you had enough of this?" I threw away the paper, holding his hand tightly, begging softly, "Please, take Ethan to the hospital. I really didn't lie to you. You saw it just now. So much has happened. Ethan hasn't woken up yet. Ethan still calls you Dad. He likes you so much. How can you bear to watch him die?" Lucas looked at me, his brows slightly relaxed. Sophia suddenly shook off my hand. Her eyes were filled with hatred. "How can you still bring that up? If Lucas hadn't arrived in time just now, the child in my womb would have been harmed by you. Now you actually have the face to ask me for your child's father, to save your child who has no blood relation to him." The door was heavily shut. Lucas's cold voice followed. "If a fever could take a life, then it can only be blamed on Ethan's bad luck. As his adoptive father, I provide for his food and clothing. I have fulfilled my obligations." I knocked on the door madly, shouting hoarsely, "Ethan is really your child. I did not have a relationship with Christopher. That day, you were the one who was drunk. That was when we first got together. Ethan was conceived that night." The door was pushed open once again. I raised my head with hope. What I saw was still Sophia's face, 3 parts mocking and 7 parts derisive. She said, "Dear sister, I know you regret having a relationship with someone else, but you always fantasize that Ethan is Lucas's child. What's the point of that? If you do something wrong, you should be punished." After saying that, the door closed again. I had red eyes, listening to the sounds coming from the room. I quietly wiped away the tears at the corners of my eyes. I returned to the room. I saw Ethan twisting his body due to convulsions. I hesitated for a moment, but I still dialed that phone number which had been saved in my blacklist. After the call connected, I said, "Hello, it's me," on the dark road. A car sped by. I was holding the unconscious Ethan, waiting anxiously outside the villa. It wasn't long before the black sedan stopped beside me. The car window slowly rolled down, revealing the sharp profile of a man. He urged briefly, "Get in the car." The man's originally cold demeanor disappeared the moment he saw me. I pressed my lips together and quickly got into the car. When we arrived at the hospital, the doctor conducted a thorough examination of Ethan. Not until I heard that his condition had stabilized did I finally breathe a sigh of relief. "You still feel cold?" I suddenly felt a weight on my shoulder. To my surprise, I discovered I was wearing an extra suit jacket. That's when I realized I was completely soaked from the heavy rain. I didn't even have time to change my clothes. Christopher's gaze was deep, with a hint of displeasure. "Lucas treats you like that. Why didn't you come to find me sooner?" I tightly held onto the suit I was wearing. I forced out a faint smile. "You helped me before. I don't want you to get involved because of me. Christopher has feelings for me, but I've always liked Lucas in my heart. 4 years ago, Christopher went so far as to ruin Lucas's company, just to make me leave Lucas, all to change my mind, but I was very stubborn. I would rather kneel in front of Christopher's door, soaking in the rain all night, begging him to let Lucas go, and I still wouldn't accept him in the end. Christopher softened his heart. He made it possible for us. From then on, he never appeared in my life again. I don't know when I fell asleep. I woke up the next day. Christopher had already bought us breakfast. I looked down at the pink rabbit pajamas I was wearing. I glanced at Christopher a bit nervously. He was looking at me with a mischievous smile. "All right, I'm not joking with you anymore. I paid the nurse to help you change. Ethan is wearing the same style as you." I turned around to look. Ethan was wearing the same blue rabbit pajamas as me. He was focused on eating the soup dumplings. The gauze on his eyes had been changed. The high fever had completely subsided. He looked particularly spirited. He asked, "Mom, are you awake? Do you want to eat soup dumplings?" The buns Christopher bought are especially delicious. Ethan reached out to grab a bun. He handed it over to me. He had a bright smile on his face, revealing 2 small dimples. I was stunned by what he just said. You call him Dad. Christopher's gaze became even deeper. Ethan nodded seriously and said, Dad Christopher, you're the new dad that Mom found for me, right? I'm very satisfied. I couldn't help but laugh. I also agreed with Ethan's statement in my heart. Christopher had to step out temporarily for company matters. When he returned, he promised to buy Ethan his favorite mountain bike model. The table was almost filled with the breakfast Christopher bought. He bought every type available on the market. I suddenly felt a warmth in my heart. I had just sat down. The door of the ward was suddenly pushed open forcefully. Isabella. My hand trembled. I accidentally spilled the congee. Lucas walked over with red eyes. He felt cold all over. His eyes were filled with anger, pointing at Ethan, who was hiding in my arms. This is what you call being in a coma, Sophia said sarcastically. Your sister is really enjoying herself. I'll tell you in a moment. Your sister is actually lying to you. She just wants to get your attention. She specifically used Ethan as an excuse. Lucas tightly grabbed my shoulder. His tone was filled with anger. He said, I'm still worried about Ethan's condition. I wanted to take you all to the hospital, but I searched the entire villa and couldn't find you. He glanced at the cluttered table. In anger, he flipped the table over. I was still thinking of letting you continue being Mrs. Smith, but now it seems you're simply not suitable. A glimmer of light flashed in my eyes. Since you also think I'm not suitable, then I might as well step down voluntarily. Let Sophia have the opportunity. Lucas's hand suddenly stopped. A flash of anger crossed his eyes. He said coldly, Isabella, don't think I won't dare. I pushed away the hand on my shoulder with all my might. Speaking to Sophia, what do you think? I will divorce Lucas today. This way you can rightfully be Mrs. Smith. Sophia tried hard to hide her excitement on her face. She grabbed Lucas's hand, gently twisting her body. In a flirtatious tone, she said, Lucas. But Lucas's expression darkened. Ethan took a deep breath. He shouted at Lucas, you hurry up and divorce my mom. I don't want you to be my dad. Lucas's hesitation instantly turned into anger. He smiled coldly. Fine, then let's do as you say. Sophia behind me was laughing happily. Her eyes were crinkled into crescents. The look in her eyes was as if she had already won. Not long after, Lucas sent someone with the divorce agreement. According to the agreement, Ethan's custody belongs to me. I give up all my assets. When Christopher comes back, the mess on the ground has been cleaned up. He brought Ethan a model mountain bike. He said to wait until Ethan's eyes are better to play with it. I heard Lucas came by. His expression immediately turned cold. I know he holds grudges. He definitely won't let Lucas off easily, but I also didn't plan to say much. Christopher suggested that Ethan and I stay at his house, but I didn't agree. I said, I still have some money, and I plan to rent a place myself. Christopher immediately responded, leave this to me. I'll help you find a place. Ethan's eyes finally healed completely on that day. Christopher came to take us home from the hospital. Ethan held Christopher's hand with his left hand, and my hand with his right hand. We walked bouncing along. It looked especially happy in that moment. We felt like a family. I couldn't help but smile happily. We arrived at the hospital entrance. The 3 of us ran into Lucas and Sophia. I originally wanted to pretend I didn't see them, but Lucas grabbed me. His eyes were filled with anger. It was as if he felt betrayed. Isabella, so you were in such a hurry to divorce me, just to be with him. Don't you think that's embarrassing? Are you so eager to help that person find his biological father? Upon hearing this, my long-suppressed emotions burst out. I raised my hand and slapped him. My gaze was cold, with a hint of sarcasm. My son is definitely not that kind of person. The one with the real problem is you. Lucas, with a loud slap, Lucas stood frozen in place. Sophia shouted, Isabella, what are you doing? Lucas, are you okay? Lucas unconsciously glanced at Ethan. He only saw his pale face. His expression was shattered. Ethan's once bright smile was now overshadowed by gloom. Lucas felt a slight pain in his heart. He said softly, Dad isn't like this. Before he could finish his sentence, Christopher kicked him down. The 2 men started fighting on the spot. Lucas was clearly no match for Christopher, who didn't practice boxing often. Before long, he was injured on his face. He looked very disheveled. Christopher wanted to continue, but I stopped him. All right, Christopher, I don't want to complicate things. Ethan is hungry. Let's go home. Christopher finally stopped his actions. He grabbed Lucas by the collar. and pulled him up. Christopher's lips curled slightly. He leaned close to Lucas's ear. He whispered a sentence you might not know yet. Ethan is actually your biological child. 4 years ago, Isabella knelt in the rain all night to get me to invest in you. She knelt in the rain for a whole night. Otherwise, why do you think I would let you go? Lucas suddenly widened his eyes. He looked as if he had been struck by lightning. It wasn't until Christopher took us away that he came back to his senses. Only then did he snap back to reality. Sophia was kneeling beside him. Her eyes were glistening with tears. She looked very anxious. She asked, "Lucas, are you okay? My sister really is something. How can she just watch you get beaten?" As soon as Sophia placed her hand on Lucas's face, he forcefully grabbed her wrist. The man's expression was dark. His eyes were bloodshot. That night 4 years ago, was it really you? Sophia's face suddenly turned pale. She hesitated for a moment. "Speak, it's not me. Who else could it be?" Immediately after, a sound of bones breaking echoed. The man stared at her coldly. There was not a trace of warmth in his gaze. "Is it really you?" Sophia looked at her hanging hands in panic. Finally, unable to hold back, she burst into tears. "Yes, big sister," his tall figure. In that moment, completely lost its strength. Lucas finally understood why he felt an indescribable affection for Ethan. Although deep down, he didn't like the kid at all. But when he first met Ethan, he still unconsciously showed a fatherly, warm smile. Every time Ethan sweetly called him Dad from behind, he always felt particularly satisfied inside. Even every time Ethan got hurt, he couldn't help but want to rush over and show concern. But every time he had that thought, another voice inside would stop him. That voice said in his heart, Ethan was betrayed by Isabella, the child with Christopher. Therefore, he had rarely shown Ethan a kind face. He felt a mix of emotions. Today, Christopher told him, Ethan is actually his child. All the questions finally have answers. Lucas recalled Ethan's eyes, which looked exactly like his own. Coming back to his senses, Lucas pulled Sophia into the hospital. The doctor stepped forward. He asked with concern, "Lucas, you are here for a prenatal checkup, right? I will get you a checkup form right away." Lucas had no expression on his face. He said coldly, "No need to bother, just open the green channel. Get rid of the child in Sophia's womb." Sophia covered her belly. She pleaded, crying, "Lucas, please don't hurt him. He is your only son." The man turned his back to the light. A cold smile lifted the corners of her mouth. "My only son is Ethan." The other side, my life gradually returned to normal after Ethan's eyes recovered. He returned to kindergarten. Ethan waved at me and Christopher. He mischievously said, "Goodbye, Mom and Dad." After saying that, she jogged through the door. Christopher laughed heartily. I gave him a helpless glare. "Did you teach Ethan that?" Christopher smiled dismissively. He refused to say anything. He looked like he was being stubborn. Just as Christopher and I were playing around, 2 figures walked towards me. He suddenly knelt in front of me. He said urgently, "Miss Isabella, please help me. Let Christopher leave my company alone. I was wrong before. I shouldn't have hit you. And I definitely shouldn't have let Tom hit young Master Ethan. Considering that Tom and young Master Ethan are classmates. Can you spare me?" Tom's mother was crying with tears streaming down her face. Her voice was choked with emotion. Kneeling beside her was the teacher who spoke to me rudely before. "Miss Isabella, it's my fault for not recognizing someone important. Please don't expel me." She begged for mercy. While secretly glancing at Christopher, her face was filled with fear. She regretted it deeply. If only I had known not to speak out. Now look at this. Because of my loose tongue, she lost that easy and high-paying job. I took a step back, avoiding Tom's mother's snotty hand. I whispered, "You have hit me a total of 130 times before." Tom's mother's plump body trembled violently. Then she gritted her teeth. She started hitting her own face again and again. She hit herself so lightly. It seems the sincerity is still not enough. "Teacher, please stand up. Roll up your sleeves." He said it in a flattering way. "Miss Isabella, let me handle it. I'm really good at hitting people. Very soon." The sound of pigs being slaughtered filled the sky. After getting in the car, my mood couldn't calm down. "Christopher." The man turned his head with a smile on his face. He looked quite handsome. The anger subsided. I slightly lifted the corners of my mouth, showing a hint of a smile. "Thank you." For the first time, I felt. So this is what it feels like to be protected by someone. Just got home. My phone popped up an entertainment news alert. In the video, Sophia lay pale on the hospital bed. She trembled slightly at the shoulders. The tears at the corners of her eyes made her look especially fragile. If it weren't for Isabella's unscrupulous actions, Lucas won't be fooled by her at all. My child won't get into any trouble either. Ethan is clearly an unwanted child. What gives him the right to compete with my child under the video? Many people are attacking me and Ethan. Everyone is saying that I am being unreasonable. Some netizens are also saying hurtful things in the comments. As the accusations grew louder, Lucas directly published the paternity test report between him and Ethan online. He also included a written statement. It stated, "The only heir of the Smith group is Ethan, and I, Lucas, have only one wife in my life, Isabella." The hospital still has the records. It seems Lucas personally went to print a copy. All those hurtful comments about me quickly disappeared. However, many people still feel sorry for Sophia. She invested 4 years of her youth, only for her boyfriend to ultimately return to his wife. Many people are comforting Sophia. Then everyone noticed a person named Taxi John posted a video. This video was recorded with a dashcam. The footage is particularly clear. That day at the entrance of the villa, Sophia intentionally tripped me and Ethan, and then she falsely accused us. Her behavior completely exposed her true nature to everyone. The driver posted many comments in the comment section. Each one spoke up for me. I've never encountered someone so good at pretending. She clearly intruded into someone else's relationship and acted as if she were the main character. Fortunately, my dashcam recorded the entire process. Once the video was exposed, those who originally supported Sophia fell silent. Not long after, Sophia's account was banned for spreading false information. This matter ended like that. In the afternoon, when I went to pick up Ethan, I unexpectedly saw Lucas. He was holding a mountain bike model in his hands. His eyes were fixed on the school gate. When Ethan ran out of the campus, he excitedly rushed in front of Ethan. Ethan quickly stopped. A look of defensiveness immediately appeared on his face. "What are you here for?" Ethan's tone was cold. Lucas's gaze towards him was also very distant. Lucas felt a sharp pain in his heart. He quickly handed over the model. There was a hint of expectation in his eyes. He said, "Didn't you always want this model? Dad bought it for you. I was wrong before. I was influenced by Sophia. As a result, I neglected both of you. Now Dad knows he was wrong. Dad apologizes to you. Can you forgive Dad in this moment?" Time seemed to stand still. Lucas's forehead was beaded with sweat from nervousness. I stood at the corner. I wanted to see how Ethan would react. I saw Ethan reach out his little hand. He directly swatted the model out of Lucas's hand. Ethan had a serious expression on his face. He said seriously, "Uncle Lucas, I'm sorry, I already have a dad. My dad is very good to both me and my mom. I don't need you anymore. Besides, my dad bought me the latest model of the mountain bike a long time ago. The one you have is last year's old model." Lucas's face instantly turned pale. His body began to tremble involuntarily. "Dad will buy you another one. Okay, come home with me. I'm begging you." Ethan pressed his lips tightly together. The small hand by his side was turning white from gripping tightly. He was too agitated. His voice even cracked a little. "Didn't you say I was a bastard? You even wanted to kill me for that woman's child. That place is not my home at all. You don't deserve to be my dad. A real dad wouldn't hurt his own child for someone else. A real dad wouldn't hurt his own child for someone else." With every word Ethan spoke, Lucas's face turned even paler. Until the end, "He can hardly breathe now, you that day." Everyone heard it. My voice came from not far away. "Ethan." He went home with Mom. Ethan shot an angry glance at Lucas. Then he ran towards me. Lucas saw me. Hope ignited in his eyes again. "You all cannot leave. Ethan is my child. You are my wife. We three are a family." Lucas's expression was filled with stubbornness and reluctance. He looked at me, as if remembering the good times of the past. "It was you who told me. As long as I don't let go, you would never leave me. Isabella, have you forgotten?" I stared into his eyes, with a sarcastic expression on my face. "So I should quietly endure you keeping someone else. Let that person's child press down on my son's head. They even falsely accused my son of being someone else's." I raised my eyes. My gaze was icy cold. There was not a hint of fluctuation. "Lucas, don't disturb our lives anymore. I believe Christopher will be a good dad." Christopher's car is parked behind us. The man opened the car door. He got out of the car. Ethan saw Christopher and ran over happily. "Dad, why did you come so late?" Christopher gently patted Ethan's hair. His eyes were crinkled with a smile. He said, "I'm sorry, when I go back, I'll do 100 push-ups as punishment." Is that okay, HMPH? This time I'll let it go. I'll forgive you. Christopher completely ignored that person. He looked at me gently. He called out, "Wife, I'll take you all home." I immediately took his hand. The car gradually drove away. Lucas stood still. He didn't move for a long time. Later, I heard that the Smith Group encountered another economic crisis. After Lucas went bankrupt, he just never managed to pick himself up again. With Ethan's encouragement, I accepted Christopher's proposal.